Hello, my name is Donna Freeman. I am the founder of Yoga in My School and the host of this podcast. I appreciate you tuning in and listening, or maybe watching if you're on YouTube. We have a great episode for you today, all about agency, self-compassion, deep listening. It's going to be good stuff. But I have kind of a question for you before we get started, because I am a little bit passionate about this work. I've been doing it a long time, but I have like a long list of potential people and topics. And for the past couple of years, I've just been publishing one episode a month-ish kind of thing. Right? It's pretty flexible. I do it when I have time. And so I have so many topics though that I think I'm going to start putting maybe more up than one a month. And so I would love some feedback from the listeners about if you want more frequency. I think my life has maybe opened up in some time spaces, and those who know me well would just be shaking their head at me saying, really, Donna, has it actually opened up? We're going to make time. Anyway, there's so many cool topics and cool people doing really interesting things in mindfulness, in kids yoga, in the youth yoga area. We're going to have an interview coming up about yoga for loss and grief and addiction, like just so many good, deep, fantastic topics that I just kind of feel the need to give you more. So if you want more, let me know, and I'd be happy. I'll try to accommodate and do the best I can. And as always, please follow, like, share, do all that social media stuff. It makes a huge difference in letting listeners find us and in supporting the work. So thank you so much. All right, today we have one of my longtime favorite people in the youth yoga movement. One of the co-founders of Shanti Generation, Abbi Wills, is joining us today. And she is just such a light in the kids yoga work, in the idea of self-advocacy for youth and empowerment of youth. And I love the work that Shanti Generation does. This episode actually came about from one of their social media posts. And she posted this nice, amazing poster, and it says, sovereign bodies learn here. And then she went on to explain just what that meant. And I just was like, yes. And so I reached out to her and I said, we need to do a podcast, and can we do it next week? And remarkably, like, her kids went to school today for the first time, and she's found time today to do this. And I'm going to find time really soon and get this published, so that, because I find that this is such an important topic. And as we are into the back to school movement in the Northern Hemispheres, I think it's so important for teachers and for youth, for parents, for everyone to be on board with these concepts and to embrace them. So without further ado, Abbi.
Thank you, Donna, so much. I so appreciate your enthusiasm for this topic and your commitment to this field ongoing. And I just echo the sentiments. You're definitely one of my favorite people too. And it's always good just knowing you're out there doing what you do. I know I've said that to you before. I vote for more frequency of podcasts, by the way, as long as it doesn't stress you out, because I do appreciate your ability to go deeper into topics and to sort of layer them over time. And your wisdom and experience in the field is really such a gift to all of us. So I'm voting for, that's one vote for you to do more.
Thank you so much. All right. So those who are not familiar with yourself and with Shanti Generation, can you give them kind of a synopsis of the work that you do and how you got to be where you're at today?
Yeah. I work in several different capacities, wearing several different hats within the education system. I work from pre-K through upper ed with learners and educators. And so my weeks are like quilts. And I love it that way, because one of my commitments is trying to understand sort of the landscape and the bigger picture of what's happening in education. And I find the only way to really do that is to be in there with the people who are doing the work every day on the front lines. And I think educators are very much on front lines in our world today. And Shanti Generation was born out of a recognition of a need for supportive content for youth. So I, have a lot of colleagues who are working with youth, and I see lots of programs. And I know for myself, I was just needing more ways for my students to kind of keep their practice going between classes and to stay connected to practice. And so Shanti Generation was really born from that need to want to support the practices of youth. And so we've created digital resources and by way of video as well as written curriculum. And yeah, over the years, I've just really worked with lots of different teams and coming into the school system from lots of different angles. Like one organization I work with is focused mostly on art and yoga, and we serve students, and that one's called Barnstall Arts. And another consulting firm that I'll mention because they're really near and dear to my heart is Full Circle Consulting Systems, where they're a full service agency serving schools in anything from equity, cultural humility, diversity, anti-bias, anti-racist training, and they include mindfulness within all of that. So it's a little bit about what I do. And this has been my whole life. So it's close to 25 years now, and it's really all I want to do. And I'm always happy to talk about it.
Fantastic. And if you have been a longtime listener, or if you're a new listener and you'd like to hear one of the very, very earliest podcasts that I did like 12 years ago, it is with this lovely lady. So go back in those archives and go find, I think we talked about youth and just the benefits that yoga has and mindfulness has for youth way back in the day. We've known each other for a while now, and it's lovely to reconnect.
That was way back. And I have to say, there's probably some things I said in that podcast that have changed because we're always learning and we're always growing.
Yeah. And I love that. I love that about it. It's like, oh, okay. That's exactly what it should be. The evolution of the practice as we evolve as people. All right. So tell me about this post that you put up. Sovereign bodies live here. What does that actually mean to you?
Well, I'm so happy that it struck a chord with you because it's something that I deeply believe in, and the actual wording and the post itself came through an interesting process that I went through with two colleagues. We were in a course together. It was a 6-month course that was held through the Embodied Lab, and it was taught by probably 20 different facilitators, but Reverend Angel Kyoto Williams and Dr. Sarah King were really the, I would say, the space keepers of the whole course. And so it was called Embodied Social Justice. And one of the tasks that we had was to work together with a team and create a project that really encapsulated our experience. And so I worked with two other educators who are very actively, one is teaching somatics in high school, and I think it's K through 12 school, a wonderful teacher named Roxanne Greenberg, and then another colleague who I do work with in the real world too, Javier Guzman, who works with big picture learning, and he's really supporting schools and really rethinking their designs from the inside out. And where our work met was in this space of recognizing that there's so many changes we all want to see in the school system, and sometimes it's hard to know where to start, right? There's the curriculum, there's the structure, there's the leadership models and the organizational models and the classroom behavior management. There's so much. But because this course that we were in was about embodied social justice, we said, what if we think about change and transformation in education from the body's point of view? Mm-hmm. What is in the way of our bodies experiencing what we all want as yoga educators, and hopefully as educators of any subject? We want to create spaces of freedom and liberation in our classrooms and on our campuses. I know that's always my goal when I go into a classroom to teach yoga, is to create a space of freedom, that being the goal of yoga. And so when we think about this from the body's point of view, I think about all of the ways in which traditional standardized education kind of ignores the body's needs at best, and at worst confines and even demonizes the body's needs. I know that sounds really harsh, but we think of things like children not being able to go to the bathroom when they need to, and what that does to a child, and sort of the humiliation that can come from that, or the discomfort that can come from a practice like that doesn't honor the body's needs on a very fundamental level. And if we think about that, from the fundamental to maybe the more abstract potential for actualization, we think about, students being able to say, like, when I hear this particular content area, I feel this in my body, to be able to articulate how learning about history feels to us. And so our project is really about cultivating somatic awareness in the classroom. And this phrase just sort of came to me, and I said, you know what, I'm going to stick with this and work with this. And I'm actually going to bring this with me into my classes, like to, I teach in many classrooms, not one, but to put it on my computer, right? This is my sticker, Sovereign Bodies Learn Here. So I know you learn when you have agency over what's happening, at the very least, for your body, right?
Yeah, and I love that, right? And I love the idea of just allowing us to feel and actually understand, because frustration, when you're like, frustration feels very different than ease, and learning can be both of those things, but in your body, it's going to feel very different, and allowing kids to experience those things. It's like, okay, and then what do you need in order to get the support that you need to feel at ease in your body, so that your mind can actually receive the information and learn. So that whole sovereign bodies, it's not just, are we creating safe spaces for our children to learn? Well, what does that look like? That actually looks like their bodies might look different for different kids. All right. So talk a little bit about that idea, is that physically, some people need different stimuli than others in order to reach optimal learning.
Right. I mean, it's such a good point, because oftentimes the behaviors that we as educators are taught through teacher education, and sometimes, these teachings are handed down through systems and generations, but sometimes we are regulating or managing the very behaviors and activities that would actually regulate that frustration or that fear that a student might be feeling. So the body knows what to do. This is, another mantra that I use with my own children and with my students, is if we can trust our bodies and know that our bodies obviously have so much wisdom for us to be on this planet and to evolve in the way that we have, and to be able to cope with a world that is full of confusion and suffering, I must know that my body and your body and all of our bodies know what to do. There is some inherent innate wisdom that we can rely on. And some of what our body does in order to, survive and hopefully thrive can get a little misaligned. Like when we're in a constant stress cycle and we're not completing those cycles, then our bodies might be in a safe space, but not know it. And so we may have to do something like fidget. So you see students clicking. I see adults all the time on airplanes clicking their pens, or shaking a foot, or just needing to stand up and walk around. Or maybe we do need to get a drink of water 3 times within one period, because that's what our body is needing in order to feel, in order just to have it. It's just a need. That's it, like, period. That's a need that needs to be met. And so if I look at a classroom where every child, every student is expected to sit in the exact same chair in the exact same way, I know for sure that some children are not getting what they need, and some are, right? So maybe the majority in some classes are just fine with that sort of typical standardized way of the body needing to be in the classroom, of the body being told how to be in the classroom. But even if you have 1 or 2 students who are feeling like confined and constricted, that can create a ripple effect of behavior and activity that takes up so much more time to try and manage than to just simply allow for students to have that choice and voice within the classroom. So one of the things I like to do when I enter a classroom, especially when it's not my classroom, but when I'm going in to, share yoga in another teacher's classroom, is to have that conversation right from the get-go of what are our bodies allowed to do in this classroom? List it out. How can we sit? How are we allowed to sit? And then what do our bodies need in this classroom in order for us to enter this new experience with a sense of trust and bravery? And oftentimes those lists look very different. Like what's allowed is very limited, but what is needed is very diverse. But when we look at what's needed and what is allowed, and if we just flip that, I find the experience is so much more impactful and successful, because then students feel like, oh, would you trust me enough to hold space for me to trust my body? Mm-hmm. And that for me is like a real heart of yoga.
All right. So immediately part of me is like cheering, yes, yes, yes. And the other part of me as a school teacher in a classroom with diverse needs, 25, 35 students, and you're going, you want what? And how am I supposed to do that on top of everything else? And now I'm just supposed to allow everyone to do whatever they need to do whenever they need to do it. Like, it's going to be like, just think of a grade 1 classroom. Like, it's just like, holy crow. So give me an example of how this looks.
Well, it's a really good point. And, as I was preparing for this conversation, I was, keeping in mind and kind of holding in my heart some of the educators I've met who have absolutely looked at me and said, you want me to do what? And so the answer is, it is a process. And I don't want you to do anything that isn't, authentic for you. Okay, that's just the way it is for everybody. And educators do hold so much power, and educators have so much power sort of held over them. And so we have to look at the systemic issues involved with making these sorts of changes in a classroom too. And all of that has to be taken into account and acknowledged. But I remember I was working with a high school staff, and I was doing something really simple with them as a way to move into mindful practices, like to literally move into mindful practices that we realized some of their students were a bit resistant, and they had real reasons to be resistant. And so I was talking about and guiding them through just tapping the toes on the floor and tapping the heels and finding a rhythm and just using this repetitive kind of reliable movement that doesn't require, they can't even see each other's feet, right? So it doesn't require a lot of vulnerability. And we did this, and I asked the teachers how it felt for them, and they said, soothing. It was soothing. And it was also like nice to hear and even feel the rhythm and from each other on the floor. And I said, oh, those are all good things. And then a teacher said, but if I let my students do this, they will walk all over me. Mm-hmm. And so we really had to pause and unpack that. Like, why? Why is it that allowing students some movement would open up this floodgate for some kind of disrespect? And so we had to look at it and go, well, because we've become so tight, we've become so tight with what the body cannot do in the classroom, that to allow any freedom feels like, it just feels jarring. And so what I suggest and what I do is to hold a series of conversations, facilitated discussions with the whole group, going out into small groups, having students do personal reflection, so that from the beginning of the year or from the beginning of when a change wants to be made, we are collaborating with students and asking them, what does it feel like to feel like you belong in this classroom? Like, what does it feel like to feel belonging anywhere? What does it feel like to feel welcomed? And how can we make this space that, so that we're not just going from A to Z and saying, well, today you have to sit with your hands in your lap and tomorrow you can do whatever you want. But it really is a process of understanding why we want our students to feel more sovereignty, agency, and freedom in the classroom, and how that impacts learning. And I think when those pieces are in place, then the way that we go about this is procedural, it's intentional, and it can happen over time. And I've seen it happen. I've seen schools where, there are the typical classrooms with the rows. And then there are classrooms with diversified seating. And so kids who need the A get A and kids who need B get B, you know?
Yeah. Okay. So let's move into that kind of diversified seating, just that whole idea of a diversification, offering choices, agency. Like, I love the word agency, and I always stress in all of my yoga teacher trainings and in my classes, it's like, hey, here's a choice. This is how you get people to own their practice, to own themselves. Because anytime you offer a choice, you provide someone an opportunity to check in. Do you want A or B? Well, now I have to ask, like myself, which one I want. And maybe I don't want either, and that's okay. But you have the choices instead of, I'm only going to offer A. And I always am like, it's like, a toddler. Do you want to wear the red shirt or the blue shirt? You still have to wear a shirt. So there's still the structure. Like, we're not allowed to run around without shirts on in public. We need a shirt before we leave the house. Do you want the red one or the blue one? Like, there you go. And then that toddler feels empowered with their choices and they can move on. And mindfulness, yoga, these practices traditionally have not offered agency, how they've been taught. And so there's this whole movement about trauma-informed and agency. Anyway, tell me about that. What does that look like, bringing mindfulness yoga into a classroom?
Yeah. Yeah, I love the way you're bringing up the toddlers, and how, as a parent, when you discover, oh, it just needs to be a shirt. It really doesn't matter what shirt. And then you realize, oh, and this is really building a skill that we all need for our lifetime. Yeah, I mean, I think about a time when I was young and in a yoga class in my early 20s, and went to a traditional yoga class, and it was a cold day, and I have an autoimmune disorder that it's called Raynaud's.
Yeah, I know that. your hands and your feet.
Yeah, so for my hands and my feet, when I go from like a warm environment into a cooler environment, sometimes even vice versa, the blood vessels, the circulation is impacted, and so it's important to stay warm in those transitions. And so I was wearing socks into the yoga studio, and was immediately stopped by the teacher and was told that those socks were not allowed in there and that I needed to take them off before I got to my mat. And I said, well, I have this situation, and she had never heard of it. And I said, so I'm just going to keep mine on until I feel like ready, and comfortable to take them off. And she wouldn't allow me to stay in the yoga class. I had to leave, and it was such a learning experience. I'm so glad it happened, because it really put me in the place of, a student who's being told, actually, I don't want you to do what it is you need to do in order to keep yourself healthy. And I was going to yoga to be healthy. So it was a real learning experience for me. And, I just put myself in the place of students. Like there was a time when I would go on my own volition, because I really loved it and wanted to 2 hours of Ashtanga yoga 6 days a week, because I wanted to. Now, if you asked me to do that now, I would say, no, thank you. If you forced me to do it, I wouldn't be a happy camper. I would feel tortured by that experience. Okay. So my sense is that from those experiences, and just from seeing so many children being exposed to these practices and seeing these practices imposed within schools, is that the real path to learning and experiencing yoga is to trust the wisdom of the body. And what we're doing when we're not giving choice is we're enforcing compliance. And that's what we're doing in a lot of educational settings. But that compliance doesn't lead to anything that any of us truly value about education. And so I think it does take kind of a leap of faith, in a sense, to say, okay, I, as an educator for X amount of years, hypothetically, have not been trusting my students and their bodies. And so by not allowing that trust, how would I know what it would even look like if I did that? Let me just try that. Instead of going, oh, you're just trying to get out of class again. Oh, actually, you need to go to the bathroom again. Let me make sure you get there on time, or even something like dress codes. I'm seeing dress codes now being brought into the fold. Like parents don't want their children to wear, some parents don't want their children to wear masks right now. We're having a problem with mandating that, but we're mandating to the nth degree what students can wear. And that's an expression of a person's self, you know? So I'm not sure if that answered your question at all, but that's the thoughts that came up for me, Donna.
Yeah, no, it's all good, right? Like I'm always, because I run a 200-hour training as well as RCYT, I'm always offer people choices. Please offer people choices. Do you want to do downward facing dog or child's pose? Do you want to do, like, especially in postures? I heard it said once that many yoga instructors are kind-hearted tyrants. They're like, stand at the front of your mat, reach your arms up, bend forward. It's like little drill sergeants, right? I'm like, oh, that's not really the feel, and that's not the intent of the practice, right? And how can we offer our students agency for them to discover and encourage that self-exploration and that self-compassion? Can you give us maybe an example of how you do that in your classes? Because I know your classes are filled to the brim with this invitation to interoception and figuring out what's going on within each practitioner.
Yeah, I do believe, and I experience that this kind of way of seeing, or this lens is baked into how I teach. I know it's baked into how you teach, and you know, so many of the educators who I follow, like David Trelevin and his trauma-informed practice and his trainings. You know, I think it really starts from the first moment. I now I have a slide. I used to write this on the board, but now I have a Google slide for Zoom that basically just has a couple of points. And one point is that your whole self is welcome here. All that you are, including your body and all that your body carries. And I articulate that to my students and recognize that all of our bodies carry different experiences. So we couldn't quite possibly ever all need the exact same practice. So acknowledging that from the beginning and taking that stance, right? So it's not just words, and it's not something we just say on the first day, but standing in a place that sees my students and sees how much they're bringing that I have no idea about, and respecting that and acknowledging that and knowing that they know their life much better than I ever could. And reminding students and letting them know from the get-go that everything I'm offering is just that. It's an offering. And that has taken time to really be able to take that stance fully. And I've had, you know, to learn over time with, you know, other different situations where if I am in someone else's classroom teaching, and I've had situations where teachers will come up to students and say, but you're not doing that right. And then I have to have that conversation and say, there is no right. This is different than math. There's no right here. They're safe. And we'll take care of that together. But there are many different ways to move and to be and to breathe and to reflect and to meditate. And, you know, this will be more effective if students find their own way in, even if it takes time, even if they just observe. There's something, this is another point, that there is a wisdom and a benefit to observing and holding space for other people to practice. So that's one example, is just letting students know that this is a space where you're not only allowed, but you have access to your own power and your own choice and agency. And definitely throughout, like you're saying, Donna, giving these multiple choices, including that choice to observe. I have not had a problem in 25 years of someone walking all over that or disrespecting that. I'm a big Freirean. I'm a student of Paulo Freire forever. And he always says that the best thing we can do for our students is to trust them. And when we really do trust them, the goodness and the humanity can shine through. And when we don't trust them, we confine them and we say, this is the way it has to be, then what are we doing? Oftentimes we're sending students into a state of fear, and we're triggering trauma responses, which is exactly the opposite of what we're trying to do with yoga, right? So I say to my teachers that I work with, if we're doing mindfulness or meditation, and you see a student sit and put their head in their hands, let them. let that happen. There's no reason for everyone to sit like this, you know? So I don't know what exactly is going on for every student who puts their head in their hands. Maybe they're frustrated. Maybe they're annoyed. Maybe they don't like it. Maybe this is soothing. Maybe this is helping to regulate. But all of those experiences are fine and welcome. I'd rather see the diversity, and I'd rather see kids doing what they need to do than know that people are sitting there holding themselves in prison in order to make me happy.
Yeah, that whole idea of forced obedience. I am a compliant person. I'm a middle child. I like everyone to be happy, right? And it was very interesting. My yoga experience for probably 10 years was all about pleasing the teacher, doing whatever the teacher asked just to please them, until I went to what was actually an advanced training and was absolutely belittled in front of everyone else. And at that point, I went, this isn't for me. I will never give you anyone the power to do that ever again. And of course, I was older. I was then in my 40s, right? But years of being the obedient student, of doing whatever was asked. And I agree with you. I'm like, I don't like obedience for the sake of strict obedience. If it works for you, great. If it doesn't, what is the goal? What is the purpose of the practice? What are our higher motivations here, instead of, does it need to look a specific way?
Yeah. That is so powerful, what you just said, that you can recognize that in yourself, and that you had that moment to mark a change for you. And even though that experience, I'm sure, was painful, just like my experience was painful, it also marked a change and a transformation. And so that is just incredibly powerful. And I feel like if we can hold space for students to learn that early on in life, there are so many implications, finding friends, workspaces, creative spaces where we feel like, okay, I know that I'm safe here because my body's telling me I'm safe here, right? I know this is a place for me to be and learn and grow because I'm in touch with those messages that my body is sending. My breath is showing me, oh, I can't breathe right now. My belly is telling me, oof, I can't let go right now. My shoulder, to be able to receive the messages that our bodies send, to know this isn't okay with me. That's to me like a number one top skill that I would hope all humans could develop over time, that will end cycles of abuse.
Yeah. And it's one thing, so you're like, there's actually stages to this, right? It's the moment of awareness that that's all going on, which is often what mindfulness is hopefully teaching people. And that practice is like, oh, who knew? My stomach is churning. Like I should have taken a minute. It could be why I'm a little bit irritated right now, right? Like all those kind of things. Mindfulness is so good at kind of just what is going on right now and just becoming aware of that. But then there's that next step of, I know what's going on in my body, but then there's the step to self-advocacy, like advocating for yourself that this might not be working for me, or I need this in order to meet my needs. And I think that is really, really hard to do, to give individuals that voice, that they feel safe enough to ask for what they need. How can we, as aware adults in youth lives, help foster that ability, or even for ourselves, find our own voice and advocate for ourselves as professionals within the structure of the school systems and the hierarchical nature of things? Like, what is your advice on that one?
Ooh, I tell you, that is a really good question. And it's an inquiry that I've been sitting with and grappling with for as long as I can remember. What comes to mind is, especially with young children, as I think about the brilliant Leah Kalish, who's one of my mentors and one of the founders of Yoga Ed, and has just been in this field for a long time. And the simple question, what do you need? That simple question, if we really get eye to eye with a student who we can sense that something just isn't working for them, whether it's a behavior that's coming through or just an emotional tone that we can feel, or a lack of participation or a resistance to to the process, to just be with them and ask, what is it? What do you need right now? Do you know what you need right now? And so there may well be an answer to that, a very clear answer, or maybe there's an I don't know, but to say, well, I'm to let them know in whatever words or terms or gestures or emotional support that we can offer, that I'm here for you to help you discover that. And that may open a whole process. When you have that sort of relationship with a student, sometimes there are serious needs that are not being met, and that needs to be known, right? When I think about on a systemic level, like you're bringing up, Donna, and this is really where I feel so passionate right now. I'm constantly asking educators, what is it that you need in order to feel that you can even bring your whole self into this work? Because oftentimes, and I'm not sure if this will resonate for you, but myself and teams I work with get called in, and leadership says, we want to offer this self-care workshop for our employees, for our faculty. We want this to be a day of well-being. And when we ask what's needed, we find out that there are some fundamental needs that are not being met within that system. And so then it becomes about, okay, then actually your self-care becomes about self-advocacy. And this is where I would say self-advocacy is easier, perhaps even more impactful and effective as groups of selves advocating. So with teens, with youth, and with educators, I would say, have a vision, know what it is that, have that awareness of what it is that you want to change or that you need to change. And then finding allies, finding people who also feel that way. And sometimes I find for me as a consultant going into a space, that is my job, is just to open up those inquiries so that the person over here and the person over here can go, oh, you are feeling that way too? You feel like we have some fundamental problems or issues that could be easily solved if our voices were heard. And so, talking about ideas for action, who needs to hear about this change that needs to be made? Who needs to hear your voice? And what are the different ways? There's so many ways. It could, well, sometimes on high school campuses, I'll have yoga students create posters to put around the school to start to get these messages across, right? And then with more, higher level and more deeply ingrained systemic issues, that's something that can take time. But I've seen educators sometimes take what is revealed through mindful practices into their unions, or, in finding an allied leadership person who they can now begin to make inroads with. And so then from there, the paths are many, but that's where I am at with it. It's about the awareness. And then it's about looking for what kind of action can we take within our environment based on our specific situation. I don't think there's any one way. And just staying inspired by following lots of incredible educators like Teach and Transform. Lisa, I don't want to mispronounce her last name, so I'll look it up.
Awesome. Yeah, there are so many, Edutopia is a fantastic resource. Like there are lots of amazing people doing incredible stuff. And to add them to your regular scrolling through, just to fill it with as much inspiration as you can, because I really feel that educators, with the current situation that they're facing and heading back into the schools full time, we are asking so much of our educators and of our parents to trust, and of our children to show up and to be ready to learn. It's just like, it's a loaded August, September back to school season, people. And then you add into that tinderbox everything that's happening on a worldwide level, and it can be really difficult for people to feel like they can even self-advocate. But there are so many creative ways to do it, to make subtle changes that have huge impact, and to know that those kind of subtle changes, and to find, like as you say, find those allies, find someone with a similar voice to yours. And that's, why we're connecting today, is someone with a similar voice, doing similar work, impacting others. And it just makes all the difference to me. So thank you for all that you do.
Thank you so much. I agree. And there's just, if I could just say one more quick thing is that, well, the educator I was trying to name is Liz Kleinrock, and she's at Teach and Transform, and she's incredibly inspiring for so many reasons. But you know, what we just did with pivoting to online schooling, to virtual learning was remarkable. If we can do that on a dime because of a virus, we can do this other work because we love each other. That's what I feel. Because we know that education, there's so much potential for education to impact society in positive ways. If we can do that, we can do this. I believe that we can. And I think it's happening. It's happening in little ways and big ways.
Yeah. Yeah. All right. So all of our listeners, remember, sovereign bodies learn here. Empower your students with choice, with agency in whatever way you can. There's lots of ways to do that. And remember that all practices are optional. Like everything's optional, especially in the yoga and mindfulness world. And students hold that power to consent. The individual gets to consent. I think that is so, those ideas are so powerful, and they will change the world. I fully agree. So thank you so much, Abbi, for your expertise, for your eloquence, and for shining your light.
Thank you so much for inviting me, Donna. I'm always happy to talk to you, and thank you for your continued contributions to this field. And I hope to talk many, many more times.
All right. Well, where can people find you, to follow you and fill their inbox and their feed with all the goodness that you're offering?
Sure. Well, you can follow Shanti Generation on Instagram and Facebook, and that's just at Shanti Generation. You can come to our site. It's not something we keep really well polished, but there's some info there. And you can follow me at Teach, Love, Breathe on Instagram.
Fantastic. All right, you guys, you heard where to go. Fill your life with more Abbi Wills. You will be blessed for it. I know you will. Thank you for listening, for watching, for following, sharing, doing all that kind of stuff. It has been a delight. Thank you for spending the time with me, and know that there is a treasure trove of back issues in the archives that you can go for a deep dive in all things youth, yoga, and mindfulness. So thank you very much. Until next time, guys, have a great day.